Okie doke. We will move on with the lesson, continuing Rule 10. This is one long rule. Matter of fact, he kind of deviates from the actual rule and covers a lot of different things. I think DK just decided that everything that just doesn't fit into the rest of the rules, he's going to cover in Rule 10. Last week we were talking about problems hierarchy has with disciples. One of the problems was with disciples, he says, is their discernment. They get tricked quite often into following different gurus, a little bit like that story about Hercules had a teacher that wound up enslaving him, and then he broke free and he tied the teacher up and took off. And so as a disciple goes along on his journey, he will encounter a number of teachers that will really seem to be almost Messiah type quality in his mind. And he reaches a point he's willing to do anything they say. And so what happens is, like Hercules, he becomes a slave of this teacher, so that is a slave from the viewpoint that whatever the teacher says, or prophet or priest or king or whatever position this guy has, guru, whatever he says, well, that the student he's willing to obey. The student says, you marry this woman or guy, the guy will marry him. If the guy says, you got to move to New York, well, he moves to New York. The guy says, you got to prepare for the end of the world next week, well, he prepares for the end of the world. And all of us, at one time or another, have gone through this where we've been captivated by some thought form or teacher. And what happens is the teacher puts the screws on us tighter and tighter and tighter until finally the student reaches a point where he thinks, well, this doesn't make sense. Finally reaches that point. It was like Jim Jones and having the people drink the Kool-Aid. When he finally got around to commanding them to drink poison Kool-Aid, some people woke up and for the first time they resisted. And when they did resist, then they had his guards pull out guns and command them to drink the Kool-Aid or be shot. So the ones that resisted drinking the Kool-Aid and until the guns were pointed at them, they were a little bit like Hercules, and finally they woke up, but it was too late for them. They still lost their lives, but at least some of them woke up. And so
some of them survive, or like at least one lady or something.
There was a couple of them escaped. Most of them didn't survive, but I think there was a couple of them away from the group that survived, and then a couple of them did escape, if I remember correctly. But it was just a handful that did survive. Yeah, it was kind of a sad situation, but that was an extreme of what happens. But many disciples go through lesser extremes where they just get captivated by some guru, and he seems so wonderful and so knowledgeable and so enlightened in their mind, and in other words, their emotional body is so captivated, they're willing to do whatever the guy says. And we see this in religion, we see this in the New Age movement. Well, maybe let me throw out this question. Has anyone here been captivated by such a guy? No, I think Rick was. Yeah, Rick was. Richard was the Messiah type character that Rick followed. At one time, were you pretty much willing to do anything he said?
Well, not exactly, because
you're pretty independent, Cuss. It's hard.
That was their problem with me, was that I don't just blindly follow, and and they wanted me to leave because I was too influential there on the others. And they
Yeah.
were afraid they'd lose them all if I stayed around. It's kind of like the saying, not ready for heaven, but hell thinks I'm going to try to take over, so they don't want me either.
Did some things that Richard did begin to not make sense that kind of made you question some stuff?
Yeah, basically, when you do things like have affairs with all the women in
Yeah,
the,
that's a big red flag.
yeah, and
That should be a big red flag, but unfortunately, a lot of gurus get away with it because they figure, well, the guy must be right, must know what he's doing.
well, his talent is still there, but the people are into. They don't claim to be still members or anything. But they're all very much into being a service to humanity. They all have groups that they've started or they teach and whatnot. So it's like, there were some good things about it. One of the things, the things that stuck with me and to this day even, is the practice of inculcating virtue.
Yeah.
That's really a key element to evolution. You have to develop the virtue that comes with the evolution, and as you do that, it does have an effect. It has been said that developing virtue is probably the safest, fastest way to grow spiritually.
Okay. Has anyone else had somebody they followed that they thought was really great until he kind of woke up?
Well, I didn't have somebody I followed, but you brought up the Emerald Tablets on that list of quotes.
Yeah.
I regarded those pretty highly for a while, and then I found out about the guy who wrote them, and he was kind of I don't know. He was claiming that he was like the sole voice for the hierarchy and
No, really?
all sorts of other stuff that would make you like not think too highly of him.
Yeah.
So I still feel like the tablets have some good stuff in there, but I kind of lost a degree of faith in them in some way after reading about the guy.
Yeah. What did I rate those? I rated them 5, didn't I?
No, you rated them 6, and I rated them 6.5.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's some good stuff. And what I look at more than anything else is, does it shed more light on some principle? And I read quite a bit of esoteric stuff, and most of it throws out all kinds of data. And data is pretty easy to make up. You can say, well, there's 100 different systems within this system, and this is happening, and on the Sirius system, there's so many planets, and on one planet there's this one type of life form, and you can come up with all this data, but there's no way to prove it's right or wrong, But when somebody sheds light on a principle, and this is why I rate L.S.A. Bailey as number 1, is he sheds light on principles. I read a couple pages there, and there's often a flash of light occurs where I see the principle that he's talking about, and that's why I rate the light so high. And that's one of the reasons he's called Master of Wisdom, because it takes wisdom to shed light on a principle. But it doesn't take wisdom, it just takes a good creative imagination to come up with a bunch of data, about what aliens look like in the center of the earth, or whatever, whatever you want to come up with, that you can come up with some pretty interesting stories using data. Well, just read a bunch of different science fiction writers. They come up with some really fascinating stuff that fits right in some of this with the channel material that you might read. Very similar, except these guys admit they're into fiction. whereas the channelers take themselves very serious, even though a lot of them just pick up stuff from the astral zone that is from some thought form that taps into imagination somewhere. Okay, any other comments on gurus? Have you ever had a guru, Edward? You've been around the bend quite a bit. Anybody ever captured your soul for a few years or anything?
No, actually, I look at things very introspectively, and I compare it to what my soul tells me, what wisdom tells me.
Yeah.
I've had what you might call a guru that is a spiritual guru that's been with me through all my lives that I met.
Are you talking about one in the body or out of the body?
Well, he showed up in one night, and I was living in a little apartment, and about in the middle of the night, I was awakened, and there was like a hole in the ceiling, and there was this light coming through, and there was this man with a turban on his head and with brown skin. And
maybe he's Kutsumi or something, huh?
well, no, he said he said I should call him Father Wisdom.
Really?
Because he said that he works with me with wisdom.
Well, good.
That I followed, and I've studied, I've looked into.
Well, somebody that appears like that, it will certainly capture your attention. That's for sure.
But
So he had your attention, huh?
well, it certainly captivates your attention. You have a certain soul recognition of these things.
Yeah. Okay, so the big thing for disciples is to use discernment. In other words, there's all kinds of, I listed, most of you probably saw that list of books I give, or list of teachings, and we had a little bit of feedback as some people didn't want us to rate them or anything, but it's important to look at things that are taught. If somebody comes up with a teaching, examine it with some discrimination. Now, the DK uses the word discrimination quite a bit, and it's kind of a bad word now. So I use discernment, but we have to use discernment in looking at these things, and not just grab a hold of them because they sound good or they sound intriguing, but try to run it by your actual soul, not your emotional body, but your soul, and see where it takes you. But I would assume that most people here in this group have probably come across a number of people that are kind of vied for their spiritual attention, and one time or another, either this life or past life, most of you have been able to escape that, or else you probably wouldn't even be here today. So anyway, I congratulate everybody for being as far along as you are, and as making every attempt that you can to try to see what is rather than be captivated by what is not. Okay, next he talks about the plan, and he says that it's important that the disciples pick up their next part of what the plan is and do what they can to move it along. Each one of us is a part of the whole. And if we're willing, each one of us that are willing will be able to pick up a step that we can take to help in a small or maybe even a significant way to further the plan. DK says it's the production of a subjective synthesis in humanity and of a telepathic interplay which will eventually annihilate time. It will make available to every man all past achievements and knowledges. It will reveal to man the true significance of his mind and brain and make him the master of that equipment that will make him therefore omnipresent and eventually open the door to omniscience. So that's, for those that are willing to follow the plan, that's kind of the promise. I think we mentioned that earlier, something about annihilating time. So guess that just kind of takes the consciousness into the eternal now, or become awareness that the past, the present, and the future are all interlinked. He says the plan involves understanding why Sanat Camara actually came into incarnation. He says he can't tell us what that is, and it can only be understood by a fairly high initiate. So he kind of dangles a carrot there in front of us. He says there's a great mystery about why Sanat Camara, who's the head logos of this planet, came into incarnation. He gives several hints in several of his writings that he had certain ideas as to that he wanted to implement. And apparently the solar logos didn't agree with him completely, but he allowed him to go ahead. So so anyway, that's there's something about that a person has to be fairly high initiate before he can grasp the whole story about why Sanat Camara came here to be with us and help us with our journey. He does say that instead of going ahead with his own progression, the Sanat Camara turned his back on the sun, because he's a disciple of Solar Logos. So he turned his back on the sun and became a son to the lesser lives. And the lesser lives, us in other words, were pleading for a God to come into manifestation on the planet Earth to be able to lift us up higher. And so that's the whole meaning behind the name of Jesus Christ, which means anointed to deliver. And that's the whole chain of things, is that we go through periods where we are receiving, and then we have to go through periods where we're giving. And so Sanat Camara is committed to be here until the last weary pilgrim makes his way home, is what is written. And when the last weary pilgrim makes his way home, then he will be able to turn toward his own teacher, the Solar Logos, and take additional steps forward in his own evolution. But of course, you evolve by assisting and you evolve by learning. So it's a whole cyclic thing. So it's not a waste of time for him to turn his back on the sun and become a son to us. In the end, it will be good for us and good for his own evolution. Okay, any comments on that before we move on? He says we should seek to know that tiny aspect of the whole, which is the immediate step ahead for us, with which cooperation is possible, that can be achieved by all disciples and should be held as a goal before all aspirants. So I like that statement he makes, of which cooperation is possible. And it's a fault a lot of seekers have, is they want to take too big of a step. You have to find what you can do to further the plan along, to further the work along, to bring additional light to you, brothers and sisters. You have to figure out something practical that you can actually do. if you bite off more than you can chew, then you wind up not benefiting yourself or others. So a person has to visualize the next step that he has to take. He says the masters have been working for about 500 years almost to manifest the plan as they see it. So the masters see a bigger portion of the plan than we do. We see a piece of the plan, the piece that the masters revealed to us, but they see a bigger piece. And in the bigger piece, they've been working through various groups and disciples and teachers here upon the planet, different politicians, different scientists. They put their attention wherever they can inspire people, but they've been working quite a bit in groups. And now, as we said earlier, they've decided to create a different type of group, which they call the New Group of World Servers. They sought to prepare us for the Aquarian Age and bring a unification of mankind with what he calls the manifestation of scientific brotherhood, in contradistinction to the sentimental connotation of the term now prevalent. Okay, so what do you think? He talks about a scientific brotherhood as different than brotherhood as a lot of people visualize brotherhood with, he says, sentimentality behind it. So in other words, a lot of people have a different view of brotherhood than the idea that the masters really want us to understand. What the masters want us to understand, he says, is a scientific brotherhood. Anyone got an idea what a scientific brotherhood is?
I think it would be a cooperative working toward some plan. I think there has to be a group synthesis that has an agreement on some purpose and some plan and begins to work as, you might call it a collegial sort of method.
Yeah, in other words, it's not nebulous or anything. Now, it's interesting. One brotherhood that is really strong is in the military service, where people actually go to battle together and depend on each other for their lives. These guys come out of that and they feel a linkage together unlike just about anybody else, you know, which it's a brotherhood quite a bit different than, say, people working in a business together. They may feel friendly, but where they're depending on each other for their very lives, those people come out and they will often keep in touch with each other for the rest of their lives after their service is ended. So they're kind of fulfilling what Ed was talking about. They have a specific goal, and their goal is to stay alive. You know? And but now a scientific brotherhood, I think Ed's on the right track here, is a brotherhood where they're linked in brotherhood for some purpose, trying to accomplish something. Now, this, I think the brotherhood that we have in the molecule would be classified as a scientific brotherhood, because we're trying to reach the 0 point so that we can draw down higher energies and higher lives to link with us. Okay, he says 2 things must happen first before this type of brotherhood can be established. He says the consciousness of humanity must be raised to the mental plane. The entire level of human intelligence must be raised. Now, he wrote this in about, I think it's about 1934 or 5. So it's been about over 80 years. What do you guys think? Do you think the intelligence of humanity has gone up in the past since he wrote this? You think he'd be happy with how mankind is?
I think it's written about in the New Era of Helena Rorich that the new understanding is coming about, that it would be coming about apparently around this time. And all of a sudden, I forgot where I read it at, was that the hierarchy has seen progression, a really jump ahead of what they were expecting from before. And with this jump ahead, it's creating a new type of atmosphere to get us to the point faster. So I
Yeah,
don't
he
think
said
we're going to be lagging behind.
this was written before World War II, and DK says World War II, Hitler and his group caught the hierarchy off guard. They were hoping to avoid World War II, but they were not able to do it.
Yeah.
But he says because we won,
But
it stimulated the evolution of humanity. The fact that we went through that great experience. Now you look at people now and you wonder, like you see these kids interviewed that's going to college and they don't know who the vice president of the United States is, or they don't know who fought in World War II even. And what I've seen is there's about a third of humanity that seems to I think you need to mute your thing there, Stacy. I hear some static there. But I think there's about a third of humanity that's really moved ahead really great. And it seemed like about 2/3 have kind of lagged somewhat and maybe somewhat of a disappointment to the hierarchy. I remember when I was, just for one thing, one of the things I received some enlightenment on when I was young was nutrition. And that was back in, I started getting interested in it somewhat about the age of, about 19. I got a little bit interested and then quite a bit more interested in my early 20s. And back then, you know, if you were eating whole wheat bread, you were really oddity back then. Everybody ate white bread, for instance. And so anyway, as I started studying this, I thought, boy, you know, I tried to visualize the world like 50 years from then, and I thought, boy, I bet you 50 years from now, everybody's going to be eating healthy. And what's happened is about 1/3 of the people are eating a lot healthier and are into it and kind of paying attention to nutrition. And then about 2/3 of them are eating a lot more junk than anybody ever ate when I was young. It's amazing. So about 2/3 are worse off and about 1/3 are better off. And I think this is somewhat of an indication in other things. About one-third of the people are kind of pretty good about looking at what makes sense and where the light is, and about 2/3 of them can be led by the nose by anybody that tells them they'll give them free stuff or whatever. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think you have to take a broad view and you have to see what's happening in humanity. I see the urge toward the freedom of the human spirit and all these revolutions and all of the dawning of the age of Aquarius. We saw the college students rebelling, and the energy was, why should I believe what they tell me? The Aquarian energy is that everyone waters their own inner garden, like the man with the watering pot, which is a symbol of Aquarius. Yeah. And I see, like in this, what they call the Arab Spring, the same sort of a overlighting urge toward freedom.
Yeah, overall, people are wanting more freedom, and so that's good. And you know, what's interesting, they say the whole Renaissance occurred because of about 80 people were the intelligence that created the whole Renaissance. It says without these 80 people, it wouldn't happen. So right now, like I say, let's suppose I'm right that maybe a third of the people are really paying attention and trying to head toward the light. So if right now we got a lot more than 80 people out there that are trying to create positive change. So maybe we're a lot better off than appears by watching the news every night.
Yeah, can I add something? Where I read that article about the advancement of the understanding and the light that's coming about. It's happening a lot faster than they had expected. I got that out of Ed had just posted Ashram's synthesis, and it's within Ashram's synthesis, so it's not related back to the time of Helena Roerich or Alice Ann or Madam B.
Yeah.
So it's more of a modern thing that they've stated that this they wasn't expecting this advancement of the enlightenment that's starting to go around. And you look everywhere, everybody on the web anyway, they're all getting more enlightened, they're more understanding, and it's happening so fast that the ashrams or the masters are going in. So it's kind of like, I don't know if this is exactly that.
I'll
They're kind
have
of
to read
going
that
into
article,
conference to readjust.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Oh, I'll have to read that. Yeah. He says the second thing that has to happen, we need to break down the barriers of separateness and isolation and of prejudice, which are keeping a man and women apart from each other. Boy, that's still something we need. Now, this written in, I think, around 1934, and this really applies to us today. Now, because they weren't successful at that, we had World War II. And so we're kind of in a new cycle. And what I'm hoping for is that the Armageddon war we're headed toward this time will be astrally on the emotional level rather than on the physical. And by using the law of correspondences, that's kind of where we should be headed. Hopefully, and so hopefully we don't have to have a physical war to sort things out. But we're in a cycle that's similar to before World War II and similar before the Civil War, where we have these cycles where we have the separation of we have these tremendous barriers, like when Congress votes on any issue that they are not in harmony with, there's almost always all Republicans on one side and all Democrats on the other, and they're not looking for solutions in the middle. And so this is the way it was just before the Civil War. And largely it was a lot that way before World War II. We had the two camps. And so we have to, he says the solution for this is goodwill. And this is part of the plan of the new group of world servers, of which we should be a part of. And he says we must do everything possible to generate goodwill. And this is a key, and there's just not very much goodwill going around right now, and hopefully we can make some breakthroughs in that area. I've been doing some thinking about, would it be possible to create some organization to promote goodwill in a way that the public would endorse, because there's a lot of people that are not really crazy one side or another that would like to see more goodwill happen and more of our politicians and leaders be concerned about the whole rather than just their own party. What we have is our leaders are like members of two football teams, where you do everything possible to destroy and frustrate the other guy, instead of realizing that we're all one team. And this is what humanity has to realize. This is what each nation has to realize, and then each group of nations in the world as a whole, that we are one nation, one team, one world. He says they sought to train and inspire workers to bring about a synthetic unity, who through their activities have so largely governed and molded our world for the past 3 or 4 centuries. There's been numerous different presentations of truth, and the main divisions have been cultural, political, religious, and scientific. So the masters have worked in all these areas. And in the more modern times, 3 other groups have surfaced, and they are the philosophical, the psychological, and the financial groups, making 7 in all. He says philosophy is more group related than others have been in the past. But financial groups, a lot of people think that the financial people are just a whole bunch of really greedy people. But according to the Tibetan, you have people that will get more and more into philanthropy. Like Bill Gates is, for instance, has established, he's done a lot of philanthropy, and others who have achieved quite a bit of success are getting more and more into it. Now, back in the old days, Dale Carnegie was a big philanthropist. He was responsible for financing many libraries throughout the entire country, and he did a lot of things. So not all financial people are bad, and a lot of them he does say, though, that the financial people will be one of the last groups to completely adapt to the Aquarian age. Because a lot of them are going to be want to hold on to that materialistic side and to keep all the gains that they have and not shift into systems where there's more cooperation and participation from the bottom up. Okay, so he says through their activities now, he says we have a humanity in close relation, though not at one, and a humanity characterized by 3 things. He says the first thing, an amazing interrelation and intercommunication of which, and you got to realize the technology he had back then. He says, of which the radio, the press, modern transportation, and the telephone and telegraph are the servants. Now, think of how he might relate this today. He was talking about how great the progress was, because they had telephones back then, the radio, and all these technological marvels that we can intercommunicate with. Now he would say we have the internet, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Zoom, all kinds of communication available. So has the increase in being able to communicate, has that helped us a lot or hindered us? What do you guys think?
I think it's helped us a lot, and at the same time, it's hindered us. It's like everything else. It has its uses. You could say electricity is evil.
Yeah, right. But like Facebook gets a lot of criticism because a lot of people get addicted to it and just spend their time just kind of surfing around on it and making and talking to their friends and ignoring everything else. But on the other hand, other people are making good use of it, and like we are making use of the services right here that no one was able to do in DK's time. Okay, any other comments on that? What do you?
Well, for one thing, we're going through a 200-year interchange between one age and another. And in that, you have a majority of the people holding on to the old time religion, dragging, kicking and screaming, being dragged into the future.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you have people like us who have a vision of what is evolving. We see the changes happening. We see the plan in action. We know the purpose.
Used to murder your ex. Woman, you say, ruined your life.
Oh, Brother Curtis, good to see you.
Lying and tell us the truth for once. Your car was stolen 2 days ago. Why wait to make the police?
Is that a radio I hear in the background or is somebody talking?
I can't.
No. Okay, he says the second thing.
Come on, Dylan.
The second thing, he says there will be a widespread philanthropic enterprise and growth in the sense of responsibility for one's brother.
Both of us.
Somebody needs to put themselves on mute. Was that you, Curtis? I hear a bunch of static in the background there.
Put it down and turn it off.
Don't talk. Okay, I'm getting.
Oh, okay. Okay. He says there's going to be an increase in philanthropic enterprises, the growth of a sense of responsibility towards one's brother, which was totally unknown a few hundred years ago. He says symbols of this is like the Red Cross, educational foundations, hospitals, and economic relief measures. Remember, he's writing in 1934. What do you think about this? Do you think since that time that there is a greater sense of responsibility for our brothers and sisters out there than we had in 1934? What do you guys think? Let's pick on somebody else this time. What do you think, Adam?
It's even showing up in animals.
Yeah, that's true. People are a lot more sensitive toward animals. Okay, I picked on Adam there. What do you think, Adam?
I think people are evolving towards that. It's not perfect by any means. I mean, I think we still struggle with doing the right thing for the right reasons. But even when we sometimes do the right thing for the wrong reasons, that's good, right? That at least gets us thinking in the right direction.
Yeah, we criticize people. They want to spend other people's money to help give away all kinds of free stuff in a way that nobody talked about years ago. So people are unrealistic about how we're going to do it. But at least a lot of people want to see other people not suffer so much and help other people. And as Stacy pointed out, we're a lot more sensitive toward animals. When this really occurred to me was when one of the few times when I was younger that Idaho made national news, is that they were having too many jackrabbits down there in southern Idaho. And so a bunch of farmers got together with clubs, and they went out and circled all these jackrabbits, and they clubbed them to death. And some people got a hold of this story, and it made national headlines, and everybody thought this was, the media presented it like these farmers were the most cruel people you could imagine, clubbing these poor jackrabbits to death. And when this happened, I thought, wow, this is amazing. When I was younger, people didn't care if jackrabbits suffered or not. And now the whole nation really cares what happens to these jackrabbits. And that was a little bit of a turning point, I think, with animals, and people are now almost oversensitive about animals. People are more concerned if a dog gets injured than if some guy gets injured. Then sometimes an animal suffering affects them more than human suffering, because people are more sensitive. So that's we're headed the right direction. What's that?
Seems like you're also seeing it. Seems like you're also seeing the concern, not only just man and to animals, but you're seeing it to plants. People are becoming more aware of keeping plants
Oh, yeah, the
and not
environment and
poisoning the
everything.
atmosphere.
Yeah, the concern is
You know,
there. We just
it seemed
need the
like
common sense to make the concern work out in a reasonable way. Um, so I think uh, the common sense application of the concern is what humanity needs to work on now. He says a third thing that he sees happening is a division of the entire human family, consciously or unconsciously, into two basic groups. First, there will be those who will stand for the old order of things, who are reactionary and separative and don't want any change. They're against the new, the beneficial, and the unifying things. Then he says, we're going to divide into another group seeking union, goodwill, and progress. Okay, so one thing he didn't point out is that not everything that is new is good and not everything that is old is bad. So we want to keep the things that are good and implement not harmful things, but new things that are also good. So we want to keep the good and implement the good. But when the good is implemented, we will have a reaction. And this always happens. When progress is made on anything that helps humanity, you have a tremendous reaction. One of the strongest reactions we have is, say, if we will eventually reach a time where we're going to have to deal with our overspending and balance and come at least a little closer to a balanced budget. We're going to be forced into that. And when this happens, you're going to have all kinds of people reacting very strongly to that. On the other hand, when we spend money on something positive, people react against that too. So what we want to do as individuals is we want to make sure we pick the right side. We look at the things where we're moving toward progress that will help humanity. We want to side with that. And the things that are going to hurt humanity, we want to not side with that. So this is we have an even split now. We have no matter what comes up, you have half of the humanity against it and half for it. It seems like so. We have to be wise in picking what we can do. Okay. Any other comments or questions on that? Looks like we're just about out of time. What you been up to, Curtis? You poking your head in here the last minute?
I've been here all the time. Where have you been?
Oh, really? Oh, I just saw you here 5 minutes ago.
No,
Yeah.
I've been looking for my phone. I had to go back to Parma on the mundane level.
Yeah. So what do you think? You see coming in the near future that is good that a lot of people will resist?
Well, their next step.
Yeah, our next step. That whatever that is. That's how about things that's happening around the world?
What do I think they're going to
Yeah.
resist? They're going to
Yeah.
resist.
What do you see? What do you see people resisting that they shouldn't be resisting? Because he says what's going to happen is we're going to be have people presenting ideas that will move us ahead, and you're going to have high resistance to some of these things.
Well, building the wall. All of Trump's ideas are meeting with resistance.
Aren't they though? Yeah.
The whole molecular concept will meet with resistance. They say there's three stages for an idea where people, first of all, they totally reject it and fight against it, and then they become tolerant of it, and then they claim the idea is their own, that they thought of it.
Yeah.
And like this whole molecular idea, which is way advanced for most people. And I've talked with probably 7 or 8 people over the last week about it. They have a very a light interest. They'll read a little bit, they'll listen to you, but as far as engaging in a deeper relationship, it's very, very challenging for them. I think deepening relationships is probably the hardest thing for people to do. Being honest in relationships.
Yeah, you mentioned building the wall, which is interesting. Is that people have good intentions of we need to accept as everybody in, but on the other hand, we can only handle so many people. So you have to reach a balance on in all these things. Be as inclusive as possible, but use common sense in everything that we do.
I think the walls are actually a good idea because it empowers those foreigners who want to come in. It empowers them to come through the right gate, through the door, and be solid citizens in the right way.
Yeah, like a lot of the Hispanics that have come in the right way or for the wall because they think, well, I came in the right way, and these guys want a free lunch. And the same thing happens with one of the presidential candidates wants to forgive all the student loans. And what's happening, she's getting a backlash. I think it's Kamala Harris, if I remember right. But she's getting a backlash now from people that have paid off their student loans. And what they're saying is, well, I went through the channels correctly. I took out a loan. I paid it off. Do I get reparations under your system? So some of the people that paid off their student loans saying that if you implement this and pay off current student loans, I want some rebate on what I paid off because I did it right. So anyway, when you deal with these things, you got the bottom line has to be some type of common sense where the people in the middle have some degree of satisfaction that common sense has been applied. Anyway, okay, any other comments or questions before we wrap it up?
I just want to remind everyone that our current president and his government is bringing to light all of the frustrations in politics, all of the frustrations within humanity in this country that have to be brought to light so that they can be analyzed and looked at and found solutions for.
Yeah, Trump is strong. Trump is strong first ray, and you'll notice the sixth and second ray people really have a hard time with him. So it's creating a conflict. But I think if the Tibetan were here, he would say, "Yeah, you're seeing a lot of conflict, but when the dust settles, everything will be better." That's
all of the stagnated forms in politics and religion and all of those things in our lifetime are being broken. And here we have one of the final things to be broken is the evils of politics.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see where things wind up another 3-4 years and 10 years. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Well, I think the key, Joe, is to just stay open. Look for the logical solution. Like you said, what's best for the individual, what's best for humanity. But you can't put new wine in old bottles, and there's going to be a substantial amount of shattering of old ideas, ideals, ideologies, thought forms, and people that are attached to those, we're going to have a major rebuttal.
Right, and one thing DK does stress, a lot of teachers don't stress, is he says, when all else fails, apply common sense. Is pretty much, he's recommended that ever so often in his writings, he recommends common sense. And so anyway, really a great group today and good energy with you. So we will sign off until next time.
Have a powerful week, everybody.
Right.
Good night.
Yeah,
And good
life,
luck.
love, and light, everybody.
Good to see you, Joe.
Yeah, good to see you too.
All right. We'll be in touch.
You betcha.